Welcome to the Kabin. Today we're returning to Middle-earth for Azog's Legion Part 4. It's time for the Pale Orc himself to enter the fray. Before we start though, remember to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Also, feel free to join us here on YouTube, or check out our Patreon page, or the merchandise over at Redbubble. Links in the description down below. With that said, let's get to it. In the previous episode of this series, we wrapped up painting all the Gundabad orcs. If you haven't seen those videos yet, you can click right here to catch up. But no legion is truly complete without a commander. So today we're stepping onto the battlefield with Azog leading the charge. In the Battle of the Five Armies, Azog dons a brand new suit of armor. I wanted to bring the same visual impact onto the tabletop, as I feel he looks best leading the Gundabad orcs when fully armored. Unfortunately, the model sold by Games Workshop is based on the look of Azog in the first two films. A few years ago, Forge World did release an armored version as part of a diorama depicting Azog fighting Thorin on the ice. However, this kit has already been discontinued, and acquiring it is now limited to the second-hand market. I looked at eBay and discovered some sellers listing the set for around £200 to £300. And since I wanted to have Azog both in a mounted version and one on foot, purchasing one set wasn't going to be enough. So yeah, I ended up buying two of these character sets. Nobody said playing Azog's Legion was going to be cheap. I managed to purchase each set for less than £100 plus shipping. Next, I needed to get my hands on the White Warg, which comes in the Finecast kit for £30. I needed two of these as well, since I wanted a separate Warg if Azog is forced to dismount in the game. So, with all that jazz, Azog turned into a £300 hero for my army. Was it worth the splurge? Well, I still reckon it is, but hey, I get that this isn't for everyone and that most folks are fine with the standard version or third-party options. Do what works for you. Let's get to cleaning and assembling the models. I'll spare you the tedious details of tackling resin models like these, so here is a time lapse. I put in some extra work converting the models themselves, since I needed to get one armored Azog mounted on a Warg, and to have the other Warg without a rider. I've seen other people attempt this, and one blog that really inspired me was Plastic Cracked by Michael Hahn. Check his link in the description down below. First off, I needed to remove the legs molded onto the Warg's body. A pair of clippers, a hobby knife, and some hobby files did the trick. The armored Azog already has quite a wide stance, so he fits snugly onto the Warg if you chop off a bit of his legs and loincloth. Just be careful with the family jewels. Using a hairdryer, I bent his legs into a more rider-friendly position. I used the same technique to find a good-looking shape for the chain on the stone flail. Now, the Warg was cast in two separate pieces, and when put together it had a sizable gap that I needed to fill with green stuff. I sculpted a fur texture to camouflage the gaps, and also to cover up places where I chopped off the original riding legs. You can equip Azog with either his mace or his stone flail, and the Forge World kit comes with both. I like to keep my options open, so I went ahead and pinned each part with a brass rod, but skipped the glue. Magnets are great for this type of weapon swap out, but in this case the wrists are too small for it. Also, the Forge World mace lacks the strands of hair on the handle, so I added those from the Finecast version. Now that everything's prepped and mounted on my homemade painting handles, it's finally time to start painting. I began by undercoating the models with grey cere, prepping them for the lighter colors I'd be using to paint the key features later. Let's start off with the White Warg, the brutal matriarch of the Fell Wargs. In the film, the Warg shares Azog's pale complexion with subtle grey and brown undertones. The reference pictures I put together came in handy for selecting which colors to use. With my airbrush, I began with a zenithal highlight of Ulthuan Grey, followed by White Scar. If you don't have an airbrush, you can achieve a similar effect by dry brushing on these colors, concentrating on the top parts of the miniature. Next up, I selectively applied Nuln Oil in the recesses of the fur. Going back to Ulthuan Grey, this time with a regular brush, I highlighted most areas of the fur. Lastly, I used White Scar as a selective final highlight. Before finishing the fur, I applied Black Legion on the nose, eyes, and claws. I also used Caribou Crimson to accentuate all the scars and clean up any mistakes with the previous colors. To add some variation and shadows, I diluted Basilicanum Grey with a generous amount of contrast medium, creating a glaze. I applied this selectively in areas I wanted to appear darker, layering it with several coats for depth. After that, I used Guilliman Flesh, diluted with contrast medium in a similar fashion, focusing especially on the inside of the ears, the lower legs, and paws. For highlighting the nose and claws, I used Mechanicus Standard Grey. And to make them pop even more, I added Celestra Grey as a final highlight. Gal Vorbak Red has a rich, deep hue that works well on the gums and tongue. I then layered these areas with Screamer Pink. For added definition, I also applied Pink Horror as a selective highlight. As a base for the teeth, I applied Rhinox Hide. Next up, I layered on Xandri Dust, leaving the previous color in the gaps between each tooth. Focusing on the top part, I applied Morghast Bone, followed by Flayed One Flesh on the very tip of each tooth. In the films, the eyes emanate a yellow glow. To mimic this, I started by base coating them with Averland Sunset, leaving some of the black paint to create a shadow effect. To enhance the look further, I carefully applied some Flash Gitz Yellow. Finally, I added a small dot in each eye using a 1-to-1 mix of Flash Gitz Yellow and Wraithbone. With the White Warg finished, it was time to paint Azog himself, the commander of my legion. Based on my reference pictures, Azog has an off-white skin with some pale brown undertones. I began by applying a base coat of Wraithbone, providing a solid tone to build upon. Afterwards, I once again used Caribou Crimson in all the thin scars and went back to Wraithbone for lines that needed cleaning. For shading the skin, I opted for Rakarth Flesh, creating a glaze by mixing it with Lamian Medium. I applied several layers of this in the recesses and areas that would be shadowed. Before moving ahead with the skin, I wanted to fix the mouth and eyes. Similar to the approach used on the Warg, I used Rhinox Hide to paint the mouth. Being so tiny though, I skipped ahead to Flayed One Flesh when picking out the teeth. Sorry, but capturing the process of painting the eyes was quite a challenge. I had to position the model as closely to me as possible and use magnifying glasses to see what I was doing. Finding a suitable camera angle was impossible, so I've instead included a small guide on screen showing a list of the colors that I used. Moving back to the skin, I applied a glaze of Pallid Witch Flesh diluted with Lamian Medium in several coats. I focused this on the topmost parts as a zenithal highlight. For intricate details like the face and fingers, I only diluted the paint with a small amount of water to allow for better control. I then used White Scar in a similar manner, adding it as a selective highlight on raised areas of the skin. I also applied it as thin lines next to scars and shadowed parts to create contrast. For the leather details, such as the loincloth and the boots, I used Catachan Flesh as a base coat. I then shaded these areas with Agrax Earthshade. I applied Bloodreaver Flesh as a general highlight, and Nightquester Flesh a bit more selectively. Azog had several dark grey features in the film, such as his belt, his mace handle, and the fur on his armor. I started by applying a base coat of Skavenblight Dinge to these areas. At this point, I also painted the entire armor with Leadbelcher. I used Nuln Oil to shade both these areas. Afterwards, I applied storm vermin fur as a general highlight for the fur. I then used a 1-to-1 mix of storm vermin fur and Celestra Grey, this time more selectively. As you can see here, Azog's armor has a bright silver shade with small scratches and dents. After a bunch of Gundabad orcs, I knew what paints I wanted to use, but I had to change the method when it came to Azog's armor. I applied Ironbreaker to make his armor appear brighter than those of his soldiers. Afterwards, I layered on Runefang steel to enhance the sheen of the metal. Instead of grinding it down like it did for the Gundabad orcs' armor, I opted to use Abaddon Black and a fine detail brush to add small spots and scratches, along with some selective edge highlights on the armor panels. At last, it's time to tackle Azog's weapons. In the film, his mace head has a pale brown hue, reminiscent of a flintstone. To create this, I started with a base coat of Karak stone. Moving on, I added a glaze of Ironrack skin, diluted with Lamian medium, focusing on raised areas. As an edge highlight, I applied Deepkin flesh. I felt the mace head needed a bit more depth, so I added some Steel Legion drab into the recesses right next to the highlights to boost the contrast. Now onto the stone flail and the base rocks. First, I laid down a base of Mechanicus Standard Grey. Then I added a dry brush of Dawnstone, followed by Administratum Grey. In the movie, there are these brown, rust-like streaks on the stone flail. To mimic that look, I used Scrag Brown, diluted with Lamian Medium as a glaze, applied in streaks. In close-ups, you can see that Azog also has blood splattered on both his armor and his weapons, so I decided to replicate that too. After having varnished the models with a 1-to-1 mix of matte and satin varnish from Vallejo, I used an old small brush to add tiny splotches of blood for the blood god. And with that, Azog the Defiler is officially done, joining the ranks of my Gundabad orcs. I used the same methods for basing as on the previous models. This project took a lot of time, effort, and cash, but I'm super happy with how it turned out. It's so satisfying seeing Azog lead his orc soldiers, looking the way I envisioned him to be. I can't wait to beef up this army with a bunch of monsters and additional troops. Now let's wrap it up with a look at the Middle-earth hobby bingo for 2023. Kala and I binged both The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings trilogies, so those boxes are checked. With Azog, the army goes up to over 700 points, so that's one evil army done. That brings me up to 8 boxes in total, but alas, no bingo luck. Unfortunately, I don't get an extra box for painting a hero, since they require you to have both a good and an evil one. Speaking of good heroes, Kala has been eyeing a Rivendell army, so of course I bought her Last Alliance box and the plastic Elrond. I've now built and undercoated them for her, so hopefully she can paint them soon, and maybe we can try playing a game together. That's it for today. Big thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified about new content. Don't forget to check out our YouTube membership, Patreon, or Redbubble for some sweet merch and perks. We'll see you next time. Stay creative, stay inspired, and good luck with your miniatures. So yeah, I ended up... Oh, sorry, I hit my beard. Combing my beard.